Coming up, was Tom Herman the snitch? Is there a single, likable, sympathetic figure in this entire drama? Despite the drama, why it's simply, what did Urban know? When did he know it? What did he do with it? And a little bit of basketball optimism. Are the Buckeyes closing in on a key target? All this coming up next on Unscripted Ohio.
Uh-oh. Sounds like somebody's got a case of the Mondays.
You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to BuckeyeGrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Ma! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Ma! The meatloaf!
Hello, everybody. I am your host, Kyle Lamb. This is Unscripted Ohio Podcast. And yes, I do have a case of the Mondays, but thank you for joining me nonetheless. I am glad you are listening today. I'm going to get right into it. First, I do have Kevin McGuire, NBC's College Football Talk, coming up, joining me here later in the show. And I'm very much looking forward to talk actual football. We'll get into national football, a little bit of Ohio State, but more Big Ten, national college football. And we're also going to touch on the negotiations going on right now between Comcast and BTN, as I know that'll probably impact some of you. Of course, an expired contract coming up, and they are working on getting that resolved and getting BTN and FS1 back on the Comcast lineup. So let's hope that will work out. But we'll talk to Kevin about that and also some actual college football and a little bit of basketball talk at the very end of the show, as Ohio State trying to zero in on a couple recruits, one for 2019, one possibly for 2020, and I will get into that later. But we have more drama from the weekend, and I don't even know where to start. I know a lot of beat writers have talked about this. You know, this whole situation with Zach Smith, with Ohio State, Urban Meyer, it has taken on a life of its own. You know, I had a special podcast on Friday, an interview with Jeff Snook. Jeff Snook was on, and we talked about his bombshell report from Thursday. We talked about how he spoke to Lynn Bruce, Zach's mother, Earl's daughter, Tina Carano, the mother of Courtney Smith. He, of course, had quotes from both of them talking about how not only did they believe that Zach did not beat Courtney Smith ever intentionally, they did state that he defended himself against Courtney. That was their side of the story. But not only did they go so far to say that, but even Tina Carano, Courtney's mother, went so far to say Courtney has been trying to take Zach down for several years. And that, of course, is a disturbing allegation, and we don't know if it's true. We're not going to know it's true. I don't think we'll ever have any proof one way or the other. Did Courtney make these allegations up? Was there some truth to it? Was she being completely honest? We'll never know the truth to all of that. But it was a disturbing allegation. It was a big bombshell report by Jeff Snook. And he came on Friday. And look, I'm just going to be upfront and honest here. I've been very critical, and I'm going to be critical again today, of the reporting by Brett McMurphy and in general some of the media. I stand behind the reasons for being critical, and I think you know many of them, and I'll talk a little bit about it today because it seems relevant in the light of the dramatic last couple of days. This is like a soap opera, and there's so much more to this story that hasn't been public, and I don't know if it's going to be public. It's not for me to talk about, but the details here would make for a fascinating HBO series, an HBO drama. You know, I watch some of these, my favorite shows are on HBO and Showtime. And some of these shows would have nothing on the drama that we're seeing right now from this whole thing playing out in front of us. And it's kind of sad. I mean, it's not kind of sad. It really is sad when you consider that we're talking about lives. We're talking about an entire family is going through an incredible amount of just unnecessary drama in the media, and I feel so bad for these kids. And the irony of some of this is that I think Zach and Courtney are both great parents individually. I think they love their kids. I think they care about their kids. But their kids are being dragged into a situation that really disgusts me. I think it disgusts everybody. And who knows if this is necessary or not. Who knows if these allegations are legit. Who knows if they're baseless. But this never needed to play out the way it did. And it's just unfortunate because this whole thing is a train wreck. And now we have, and I think Ohio Attorney 14 on Twitter, the Reddit attorney that I had on the podcast last week, I think he said this best. I think we have reporters now that are pawns in the two sides of this story. Courtney's side, Zach's side, Ohio State side, whatever you want to pit these sides against each other, that's fine. And I think you have now Jeff Snook and Brett McMurphy being unknowing pawns to this whole mudslinging. And it really is unfortunate. Jeff came on the podcast last week, and he told me, and I agreed with him, and I believe he was telling the truth, that he doesn't like to use anonymous sources in his reporting. And now look, the subject of anonymous sources has been debated among journalists, among reporters. This is not a new thing. This is something that has existed in reporting for many decades, okay? This is not a new argument, and there are some would say that, yeah, there's no problem using anonymous sources. There are others that say you should never use anonymous sources. There are some people in the middle, and I'm kind of in the middle. I think it's okay to use anonymous sources at times. I wrote the Title IX sexual misconduct policy column 2 weeks ago, and that used a couple of anonymous sources. And the reason I did that is because the people that I used for that story are in a position where they don't work for Ohio State. They don't work at a university where their employers would be very happy about them publicly commenting on a situation like this. And that's just the reality of the situation. Some would say, yeah, if you don't have sources that are willing to go on the record, then maybe you should not print it. I understand that side, but it's not always practical. I don't think there is anything wrong with using anonymous sources at times. Where I personally draw the line, as I think if you're going to use anonymous sources, it's going to be a situation where the details are more important than the identity. But if you're throwing stones in a case where it's a matter of he said, she said, in this situation, I think that it's important to have somebody on the record that is willing to say this conversation took place. And so on Saturday, after a tease on Friday afternoon, Jeff Snook follows up with a new report that Tom Herman is the guy that tipped off Brett McMurphy to this Zach Smith situation. And it's interesting because I saw out there on the internet there was a reference to a July 20th tweet from somebody, apparently from Texas, putting it out there that wonder if the Columbus media will catch on to this Zach Smith story. And that's an interesting thing because clearly somebody knew this was coming up ahead of time and somebody got tipped off. Now, whether that was Tom Herman or not, we will not know. I'm just going to quickly comment, and I will say, I don't know if Tom Herman is the reason that this story got started. I don't know if he tipped off Brett McMurphy or not. But there are some things that make sense. I mean, there's more to Tom Herman that meets the eye. I think I can say that without betraying, any confidences or things that I may have heard about the situation. But I can't say that Tom Herman is the reason that this story got started. Now, some may say, well, this is a matter of ethics, and he should have reported this. I completely disagree with that. That argument is actually bunk, and I'll tell you why. If Tom Herman cared about ethics, if he cared about morality, about reporting something, if he knew this in 2015 when he got to Houston, or if he knew it in 2016, or if he knew it in 2017, if he were worried about that part of this, the morality side, he would have and should have leaked this a lot sooner. But this, if in fact he is the one that leaked it, this is not having anything to do with doing the right thing. if it is in fact a leak from Tom Herman, then this would be simply about some sort of vendetta. And so I don't want people saying that he should have done that, because he shouldn't have. If he wanted to do it, then go to the proper authorities and report the situation for the right reasons at the right time. Don't do it 3 years later. And again, if Tom Herman is the guy that spilled the beans, fed Brett McMurphy, then there's no excuse for when and where and how this happened. And the timing is it's bad optics, okay? There is no reason to come out with this now. It is a violation of the unwritten coach's conduct. You don't rat out other coaches. And personally, look, I'm not saying I subscribe to that. I don't like the unwritten rules. It's like baseball, right? There's a bunch of these unwritten rules, and I say, forget unwritten rules. You know, if you want to make it a rule, make it an actual rule. I'm not saying that because the coaching industry is determined you don't rat out other coaches. I'm not saying that should be true. I think if there's violations, I think if there's legitimate wrongdoing, I think if there's some kind of cover-up and somebody's rights are being violated, absolutely, you should rat that person out. You just should. It's doing the right thing. It's being a good human being. But don't tell me that if Tom Herman is the whistleblower here, if he's the guy that tipped off Brett McMurphy, don't tell me this is about doing the right thing. Don't tell me this is about morality. Don't tell me about ethics. If he waited 3 years to spill the beans on these allegations, this is not about doing the right thing. That being said, Jeff told me he didn't like using anonymous sources, and I'm going to take him at his word for that, and I hope that there is more to this story, that he's got more to back up and corroborate this information than just anonymous sources, because I think it looks bad. I think these are bad optics. I think after we've spent so much time and energy ripping on Brett McMurphy, rightfully so, and I'm going to do it some more, and I'll get into that in a second. I think if we're going to go down that road, I think we've got to be consistent. And in the original story last week, the one with Tina and Lynn, you know, he probably could have gotten a second side of the story. I mean, some would argue that because he spoke to Tina Carano, that was a second side of the story. I'll buy that. But if the allegation is going to be made that Courtney was trying to set up Zach, I think that he probably should have reached out to either Courtney or Courtney's attorney, get a comment on record about that situation. At least offer them the chance to comment. And this story, I'm not saying it's unethical because, again, people are torn on the use of anonymous sources, but I think it's a bad look for Jeff, and I wish he had somebody on the record to say this conversation existed. I know for a fact Tom Herman was the source, and I think we wouldn't be in the situation that we are now. You know, on Saturday on Twitter, and you can tweet at me if you haven't already. Ask me any questions, comments, anything you'd like to bring up at KYLam8. But Saturday on Twitter, I poked the bear a little bit. I've probably not hidden my disdain for how this whole story has been reported. I think one of the things I really dislike about this situation is the way the national media has approached this. It's mostly come from a bully pulpit. It's been a virtuous stance where they just want to rip into the morality aspect of this and not consider there's a whole subjective side and then there's actual facts. And they've been basically towing the line of firm virtue and subjectivity through morality, but they haven't dealt with the factual side of this argument. And what's really worse is because the media will stick up for one of their own almost every single time, and we saw it again on Saturday. Stuart Mandel, a guy that, by the way, has always been one of my favorite media members. He's been a guy that I think usually is pretty reasonable. He's pretty objective. He's a guy that I think calls it fairly and down the middle. He did not do that. He has not been doing that in this situation, and on Saturday, he didn't do it again. He responded to Jeff's most recent report about Tom Herman as being irresponsible journalism and being reckless. And I don't have a problem with that opinion in a vacuum. If you want to say that was irresponsible and reckless to go to print with allegations that Tom Herman tipped off Brett McMurphy over the Zach Smith Ohio State scandal. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to debate you. I think it's fair. I may disagree slightly, but I think it's fair. I said a minute ago, I think Jeff probably in this situation, I think it's bad optics that he went to print without having corroboration on the record. So Stuart Mandel is not alone in that opinion. There are many people who I'm sure agree that it was reckless and irresponsible. The problem here for Stuart and for the national media at large, they've been spending the last 2 weeks defending everything Brett has done in this entire process with his reporting. And it's been sloppy, and it's been careless, it's been reckless, it's been irresponsible. Those are the words people have been using about Brett McMurphy's reporting in this situation. And I'm not going to get into Brett McMurphy, his reputation. I'm not going to get into his past, his history. I'm not going to take shots at him. I don't think that's fair. I don't think he's a guy that's sitting here making things up. I don't think that's something people should not be going down that road. Do not accuse Brett McMurphy of lying or making stuff up. I don't think that's fair. I don't think there's anything that proves Brett McMurphy has done that in this situation. But it has been reckless, and it has been careless, and it has been irresponsible. When you edit posts or stories without any kind of retraction, without any kind of telling people why you're editing, that is reckless. That is irresponsible. When you get one side of a story, as Brett has continuously done throughout this entire process, that is careless, that is reckless, that is irresponsible. So for Stuart Mandel to suddenly come out and say, and call out Jeff Snook, who, by the way, is not a member of his tribe. That's the funny thing. I just said the media does not eat one of its own. They get defensive when one of their own are attacked. And that's what's been happening the entire process. But Jeff Snook is not a member of one of their own tribe. He's been out of the sports beat for many years. He used to cover the beat. You know, he covered Florida. He covered Florida State. He used to be an Ohio State guy. He's covered the beat. It's not like he hasn't been around. But right now, he's a freelance author. He's been out of the game for many years. So it's easy for Stuart or anybody else to gang up on Jeff and say this is reckless because they don't have to see them every day. They don't have to talk to them every day. They have no stake in the game. So calling out somebody like Jeff Snook is easy prey. It's easy pickings. It's a wounded fish. It's a wounded animal. You can jump on it with no effort whatsoever. But when it comes to Brett McMurphy, you know, people are just not going to touch him. He's unimpeachable. And I dislike that. If you're going to apply the ethical standards to one reporter, do it for everybody. Don't have selective ethics. Okay, the latest report, Saturday, Brett McMurphy reports that these texts from Tina Carano to Zach Smith basically showing that Tina knew of abuse and believed Zach was responsible for these abuse. Well, 2014 was a year before the next criminal complaint came out in the Powell Police Department. Almost 1 year, a little over 1 year, actually. It was October 2014 when these texts took place. The criminal complaint took place October 26, 2015. Now, these texts, if they're legit, and again, we don't know if they are, let's keep that in mind. The disclaimer that we have to offer with every conversation we've had in this throughout this whole tribulation, we have to remind ourselves this is just one side of the story. We don't know if this is legit. But if these texts were legit and Tina Carano did know about this, they also read like a mother that was reacting, upset, and deservedly so, over her son-in-law that had just apparently cheated on his wife. And it would be understandable for Tina to be upset about that. And there's really no definitive part of that text that tells us for sure that Tina was responding to possible abuse allegations. We just don't know. It doesn't appear from the context that happened. You could make that case, but it's not real clear. But Brett McMurphy basically reported, without any corroboration whatsoever, that Tina confirmed these texts, which later she said she did not. In fact, her direct quote to Brett in the story was an extension of what she told Jeff last week, in that Zach's only goal was to defend himself against an aggressive attack, and that she was trying to set him up. That's basically what she told Brett, and that's the same thing she told told Jeff Snook last week. But Brett reports that Tina signed off on these texts. And then a curveball was thrown on Saturday afternoon when a Facebook account purported to be her basically shows up on Brett McMurphy's Facebook page where the report had been posted, and she says flatly, I don't remember these texts. Do you have some kind of proof? Where did they come from? Now, I don't want to get into the angle of, by the way, that Facebook page, that Facebook link, it has been corroborated that was Tina, barring her account being hacked. That was her, but it appears it actually is her posting these posts on Facebook. And she's basically since said also on there that she hung up on Brett and she had some choice words about Brett's reporting. Now, my take is those texts could be legit. I think there's some questions here. Where did Courtney get them? Because obviously she took pictures of somebody else's phone. It's clear from when you look at the pictures that they were not typical screenshots. They were actually pictures of somebody's phone. So did Tina know that Courtney was actually taking her phone and taking pictures? We'll never know. It's possible Tina did consent to those pictures being taken, but maybe she later learned that Courtney was, in fact, lying about the allegation, lying about the abuse, and trying to set Zach up. Maybe that came later, and maybe that explains Tina's initial reaction to those allegations. We just don't know the timeline there. We don't know what she knew. We don't know when she knew it. But the problem I have, then Brett later adds an update where, Tina responds as quoted, and it also goes to say that in 2015, these pictures were used to pass along as part of a criminal allegation to the Powell Police Department, and it suggests that the Powell Police Department, it doesn't outright say it, but it suggests the Powell Police Department confirmed that this was, they took notes of these pictures and uploaded them and put them into the file and whatever they would do with the chain of custody. It kind of hints or implies that happened. Except there is no quote, there is no specifying that the Powell Police Department confirmed this. They certainly did not comment on the record, nor would they right now, because we just found out last week they're not even turning over documents to the media now. This case has disappeared from the public eye. You can't find it in a public record search. So the Powell Police Department did not issue any kind of confirmation independently corroborating this information that Brett puts in. But yet his story reads like a guy that corroborated this, when in fact it was, again, just a series of screenshots and pictures of another phone that Courtney is telling him and telling us, telling the world, that is legit. And we don't know if we don't know if these text messages really happened, if they were edited. We just don't know that. But that's not the point. The point here is, again, Brett did not get secondary verification of these text messages. He did not authenticate them in any way, shape, or form. So don't tell me that Jeff Snook is the only one who was reckless and irresponsible here, because he isn't. And it's time that if people are going to call out Jeff Snook, and I have no problem with that, I think the optics are bad on his reporting with this latest report. It's got to be two-sided. It's got to be consistent. Let's call out ethics when it actually is a problem, not just when it suits us. Tina Carano, look, I don't know what her goal is here. I don't know if she is just trying to protect her grandkids, if she's trying to protect Zach from a daughter that she thinks has gone off the reservation. I'm not sure what she really believes in her mind. Maybe she's conflicted. Maybe she's trying to rationalize everything. I don't know what Tina's goal is here in all this. But I think, to be honest, we're at a point with this drama, I don't think there's a single person in this case whose dogs are really barking. I think Brett McMurphy is off the reservation right now. I think this is personal for him, and I think ethics have gone out the window. Not that he's making stuff up, but he's careless in his reporting. because I think he wants the story so bad and he's trying to chase it. He can feel it, and he won't let go. I think Zach has got obvious issues. We know he's had issues. And to his credit, in the interviews 2 weeks ago, or last week, the interview he had with ESPN, the interview he had with 105.7 The Zone in Columbus, he admitted to some of those issues. I thought that was kind of I don't want to say it was a stand-up guy, but it was stand-up-ish for him to come out and admit that he's done wrong. Okay, he's admitted that he has some problems. I think Courtney has some problems. I think it's clear that she has a lot of problems. That doesn't mean she's lying, but she has problems. Brett, we've talked about that. Look, I don't think there is a credible source here. That's the problem. I think that we've got a bunch of crazy running around, and it's gotten away from what really matters in all this, and that's how it pertains to Ohio State. And, our favorite Reddit attorney said it on Twitter yesterday, and he's absolutely right. All of this theatrics, everything that's going on, the drama, all the stuff we're talking about, it's interesting to talk to. It's like a train wreck. You can't look away from it. We're sitting here talking about it, and I'm guilty as anybody because it's fascinating stuff. But when it comes back to Ohio State, as it pertains to Ohio State, as it pertains to the investigation into Urban Meyer, it comes down to a couple simple facts. What did he know? When did he know it? And what did he do about it? That's all that's going to decide this case. I'm not worried personally about the morality clause. I'm not worried about Mary Jo White. I'm not worried about her railroading Urban Meyer because I think Ohio State sent this to an investigation just wanting the facts. And I know if you look at the Bountygate situation with the Saints, if you look at Jerry Richardson with the Panthers, you look at Ezekiel Elliott, these are NFL situations that Mary Jo White either assisted in or oversaw the investigation. These are some clear examples where the result was not favorable when Mary Jo White had her hands on it. But I also think you could make the argument Mary Jo White was finding exactly what the NFL wanted her to find. In this case, I don't think Ohio State sent her out there trying to railroad Urban Meyer. I think they actually sent her because she has that reputation of being a hound dog. She can sniff things out. She was a former federal district prosecutor before her days as SEC chair. I think Mary Jo White's reputation is exactly why Ohio State picked her. If the narrative is, we got to find somebody that's impartial and tough, well, they picked the right person. Now, I'm not saying that this investigation necessarily is all for show. I'm not saying Mary Jo White and the investigative panel is going to come back with the all clear just because that's the result that Ohio State wants. But I think they're going to come back with the all clear because I just don't think that there was any wrongdoing here. I think protocol was observed. I think clearly Title IX and the sexual misconduct policy does not apply to Courtney. And I think we're going to find that Urban fulfilled his obligation to report in as much as he needed to report this off-campus incident. So when it's all said and done, the Ohio State angle has not changed from this. Theatrics aside, the drama, this HBO special that's going on, playing out in the public, it's fun to talk about. We'll keep talking about it because I think to some extent it could diminish the moral outrage the more we learn about it. The more we're finding out. How would you really want Urban to police all this? When you're seeing the drama play out that we're seeing, how could you expect somebody like Urban Meyer in his situation to actually take a stand on this? It doesn't make any sense. No football coach should have to get in the middle of something like this and fire a guy because of these crazy allegations from both sides, okay? The police didn't handle it. Allegedly, the police contacted Ohio State. They gave the all clear on this. And given what we know now about the drama, what Courtney's mother thinks about this, it would be irresponsible for any football coach to fire somebody over this kind of an allegation. There's just not enough there. It's not right to expect a coach to go this far above and beyond what the law says he's supposed to do. Okay? It's like the movie Office Space. And it's like that scene where she's at Tchotchke's and her manager is busting her butt about how much flair she's wearing. It's like, if you want me to wear 37 pieces of flair, then make the policy 37 pieces of flair. Urban Meyer, if you want him to fire a coach because of actual conduct, spell it out. Don't expect there to be some kind of subjective morality clause. Even though our policy says you don't have to fire him, the morality clause expects you to go above and beyond. No, if you want 37 pieces of flair, make it 37 pieces of flair. I don't know what's going to happen here, but honestly, I said this from day one. I'll continue saying it. What we know right now, based on the law, based on the policy, based on the procedures, I don't see a reason for Urban Meyer to lose his job. I just don't. It's not being partisan. It's just I've been relying on facts. I've been relying on attorneys. I've been relying on the law. I've been relying on protocol. There is not, in my opinion, a justified reason for cause to terminate Urban Meyer. And all of this aside, as much as it's gotten us away from talking about the real issues, it's interesting to follow, but I don't think it changes the case any. Anyhow, so I'm done talking about that for today. Just fascinating. We'll keep following this. I'm sure we haven't heard the last of it, but it's time to get into some football with Kevin McGuire of NBC's College Football Talk. Thanks for joining me to talk some actual real football. It's a breath of fresh air for people in Columbus to actually start to turn the page and look ahead to the 2018 season. So thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, you know what? As serious as the topics that we've been talking about out of Ohio State are, it is nice and refreshing for me to get a chance to talk some football with you. So I'm looking forward to that. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, nobody likes talking about these allegation scandals. They're really no fun. That's the thing. It's like most media members. I mean, there are some that are guilty of taking advantage of it, but most people don't actually like talking about it. They're uncomfortable. So I want to start with a kind of it's funny, we said we talk football, but I actually want to talk about a non-football story for a second. Something that you had been posting on your Twitter, and I thought this was interesting. The whole Comcast Big Ten Network deal being expired, and of course, Big Ten Network kind of coming out with some passive-aggressive, the stuff you hear all the time when these deals come apart. Don't get caught without BTN and FS1 and. I'm interested in your take on this because it's kind of funny. We see this so often and everybody freaks out about it, but almost all the time these things wind up getting taken care of a couple days before and nobody actually misses anything. So I'm curious your take on this pending battle between Comcast, Xfinity, and BTN.
Yeah, well, first of all, in the interest of full disclosure, I write for College Football Talk, which is part of NBC Sports, which is owned by Comcast. So I will try to say I'm not biased in anything here. I'm actually looking at this as a customer from a customer standpoint because I am also a Comcast customer. So I look at this thing and I just see the same kind of routine that we've seen play out numerous times over the years between big time conferences, their media rights, and different cable and satellite distributors. We see this all the time, and this is nothing new. In fact, we've even seen a Big Ten versus Comcast clash in the past, and if it wasn't settled right before week one, it was settled very shortly after week one, if I recall. So I would stress patience here. I mean, we still have a few weeks to go for these guys to come together on some kind of resolution. And I understand you want to play the PR game if you're the Big Ten and try to get all the fans to call up the Comcast lines and demand that they come to a deal here. And Comcast is going to play the same game. And that's just the way that this works. But like I said, these things will sort themselves out. So if you're worried about losing the Big Ten Network, or if you're worried about losing access to any game that may be appearing on Fox Sports 1, for instance, I would not lose sleep over this. Again, if you miss the first week of the season, I'm pretty sure that things will be settled by week 2. I know that's maybe not an ultimate consolation prize, but again, these things will sort themselves out. There's too much at stake for both sides to lose on this one, and I really don't think that anybody wins if you end up not having Big Ten games on Comcast platforms. So your Big Ten fans are going to be unhappy. Comcast customers will be unhappy. Nobody's going to be happy. So it's going to work itself out. That's why I'm not stressing over this. I'll watch the PR game and the mudslinging back and forth from my point of view, but I really don't think that this is going to be too much to be too concerned with by the time season starts.
Yeah, the propaganda in these things from both sides, from the network side and the multimedia conglomerate side, it's funny to watch. They just toss these passive aggressive jabs at each other and don't get caught, without this channel, and it's hilarious to watch. It's entertaining if nothing else, and like you said, it usually winds up resolving itself.
Yeah, and the Big Ten does have reason to be concerned because Comcast, I guess, was dropping Big Ten Network from out of state or out of markets. I'm sorry, out of the footprint markets, however you want to term that. So, I mean, in the South, you may not be getting the Big Ten Network. So, I mean, if you're the Big Ten, I understand that it looks like a warning sign for impending doom. But again, certainly within the Big Ten footprint, I think you're going to be safe. Outside of it might be a little bit iffy, but I think you'll eventually get it back. I think it's just another part of the game that Comcast and Big Ten are playing back and forth.
So let's move on. Some actual football talk that we promised. Couple Big Ten questions. First, we'll start in Columbus with Ohio State. An interesting byproduct I was thinking about with all this attention on the Urban Meyer situation. Dwayne Haskins now is suddenly the pressure seems to be off him because nobody's talking about that. I'm curious your take from a media perspective. If this might be a good thing for Haskins, because he would have gone into practice getting all the questions. Every day he'd be asking about his role as a starting quarterback, and now he's just kind of flying under the radar, getting to do his thing without the media distractions and the potential for getting high expectations. And do you think this could be a good thing for Haskins in that he can just kind of go work on his thing without the added pressure right now from the outside?
Yeah, as weird as it seems to say, I mean, it could kind of be a blessing in disguise as far as football is concerned, because he is getting a chance to just focus on his job and doesn't necessarily have to deal with the outside pressure. That doesn't mean that there isn't outside pressure and that it won't come later on. But I look at Dwayne Haskins. We know that he's very talented. We know that there's some really good potential there. And taking over the starting job from a guy that had been there for how many years now, JT Barrett, and had accomplished as much as he did. I mean, that's not an easy transition for any young player to make. But I think the game has changed a little bit where you see young quarterbacks really step into that kind of spotlight when given those opportunities. And if they have the skills and they've got the coaching, they're going to be just fine. And I think the coaching staff and the support that he's going to have around him is going to make for a relatively easy transition, as easy as it can possibly be, I suppose. So I'm not too worried about him, and I think he's going to have a good mentality going forward with the starting job. And it also helps that a lot of the tension that is being given to this offense, at least, is going to another sophomore breakout star from last year in J.K. Dobbins. So I think that kind of helps alleviate some of the pressure as well.
How do you look from looking at this from seeing Ohio State last year, with some of the perceived issues they had with their passing game under JT Barrett? We know Barrett had some games. We saw a great game against Penn State last year and leading them from behind, but we've also seen games where he's struggled. How much do you think Haskins' ability to throw the ball downfield will change this Ohio State offense this year as we head into 18?
I wouldn't be too concerned about it. I mean, he's got some good receivers to rely on that are going to help him out. Paris Campbell might be one of the best wide receivers in the game, so that certainly helps. And he's going to have protection. I mean, the offensive line is not going to crumble in front of him, so I think some of that pressure will be taken off. And it's really just a matter of getting in a rhythm and getting in that comfort zone. And I think. I think as the season goes along, that's going to be just fine. I don't think there's any reason to be too concerned about the passing game. Obviously, we'll see. There's going to be some tough challenges, certainly in the month of September with the games away from home against TCU and at the end of September at Penn State. So, I mean, we'll get a really good sense for just how far along he has come and what we can expect from him as the season progresses. Right in that first month of the season. So I think that's a good thing. Hopefully, and we'll see if that comes back to hurt them at all. But I'm not too worried about that going in.
Let's talk about that Penn State team. A very loaded Big Ten, and I'm curious. Penn State, obviously, they've got Trace McSorley back, Juwan Johnson. They've definitely got some weapons there. It's interesting because most of the talk is going to be about how do you replace Saquon Barkley. Right. I think for me, I'm more interested. I think Miles Sanders is a perfectly capable running back. I feel like he's going to step in. I think replacing Deshaun Hamilton and Mike Gesicki are going to be bigger deals for that Penn State offense than maybe Barkley. What do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And I think one thing that's going to be different this year when you see teams playing against Penn State is they're not necessarily going to be selling out to stop the running back and preventing from being on that player's highlight reel. I mean, if you go look back to the Penn State game against Northwestern last year, Northwestern did everything they could to not be on the Saquon Barkley highlight reel. And aside from one play, they did a masterful job of that. So I don't think that's going to change the defensive mindset a little bit, at least until teams figure out whether or not Miles Sanders is going to be the same kind of a threat. I don't think he will, but I think he'll be a pretty solid running back. So I think the running game is still going to be in pretty decent shape for Penn State. And this is going to be the best offensive line they've had in a while. It's not the best offensive line in the Big Ten, but it's the best offensive line that Penn State has had probably since 1994. It's at least the deepest they've had. The recruiting sanctions really hurt the offensive line more so than any other unit. So I think they're finally getting back to being pretty comfortable in that particular area. And then again, having Trace McSorley is going to make things a little bit easier at the beginning of the season and make up for some of the losses that they do have, because they do have some significant losses. It's not just Barkley. Like you said, Deshaun Hamilton was a go-to wide receiver, so they got to find another guy that can step up in that role. Mike Gesicki, I think, was the best tight end, and certainly in the Big Ten, maybe the nation. So I really think that he had a pretty good impact on there. But Penn State's going to have some players that I think they're going to be ready to step into those positions. And I think, again, having Trace McSorley is going to make things a lot easier, at least at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, that offensive line, I think, was a key in some of their inconsistencies at times because, you'd see Barkley rip off these long runs, but then the line would give up a couple, 2, 3 negative plays in a row. And I really think that was a key to them not being able to sustain, success offensively at key times throughout the entire game. And so it'll be interesting to see how that line, like you said, at least on paper, they should be much improved. It'll be interesting to see what kind of production that gets.
Like I said, I mean, it's going to be their best offensive line they've had in a while, and defenses are not going to be selling out to stop the running back the way that they did with Barkley. So, I mean, it's going to be a different kind of a game management that you're going to see. So I'm very curious to see how that goes, especially in that Ohio State game at the end of the month of September.
So with Shea Patterson on board at Michigan, what's your expectation for the Wolverines this year? Is Patterson going to be the guy, the savior that they expect? Is he overhyped? How do you feel about his arrival in Ann Arbor?
I like it, and I think expecting Shea Patterson to be the cure-all for this Michigan offense is probably misguided. But I do think that he has the potential to really help this offense as a whole kind of improve. I mean, they can't get much worse, right? I mean, It was pretty bad last year. And I think going into this season, I think if Shea Patterson makes the transition as smoothly as I think he will, I think that this Michigan offense will definitely improve. Will they improve significantly? I don't know yet. We'll get a good sense of that in week 1 against Notre Dame. But like I said, they can't go further back offensively. So I think even marginal improvement offensively is going to make Michigan much more of a I don't know if I want to say threat yet in this division, but they're going to be competitive because the defense is going to be just fine. Defense is going to be their strong suit once again, and they just need to find some points on the board. And I think that they'll be able to get a few more points this season, and that should make things a little bit more interesting for Michigan and Ann Arbor.
I think the fascinating thing for me is with legitimately 4 Big Ten East teams that could probably win the Big Ten this year, and any one of them could wind up with conceivably 2, 3, 4 losses just because of how difficult the schedule is, and it's going to look like a disappointing season. And that's kind of the interesting thing for me, for Michigan as well, because I think they're in that same boat. I think on paper, they're going into the season with a potential legit top 10 type of team, but they're also facing possibly the toughest Big Ten schedule that we've seen in many years. So it's fascinating to me to see how many programs this year in the Big Ten are going to live up to expectations just because the wins and losses may not be there for some of these teams.
Yeah, I mean, this is a division that could very well cost itself or cost the conference a shot at the playoffs, if you think about it, because, as good as Ohio State may be, as good as Penn State could potentially be, if Michigan really does improve offensively, you're still at risk of missing out on the playoff with a playoff-worthy team because as good as they may be, they may not have the wins at the end of the year. And as we have seen with this college football playoff, there is a little bit of a small room for error here. One loss may not necessarily eliminate you, but 2 losses certainly will. So you lose one game, you're walking on some really thin ice, and even that's not a guarantee that you're going to get at one of those spots at the end.
I'm curious on a national level. You probably saw the coaches poll being released last week, and I'm curious your take if there are any teams that jumped out at you as being maybe overranked or underranked to start the season.
I was okay with the teams that were in the top 10. Certainly, I think the top 5 were the top 5 I would have had. I may have switched in order, maybe 1 or 2 spots, but I wasn't real surprised with the top 10. Outside of that, I think we get some leaps with the traditional annual dependence on a program like Florida State and Texas. I think they'll improve this season, but I think putting them where they were in that top 25 might be a little premature right now. I think Notre Dame and Michigan are always going to be a little bit higher than I expect them to be. So I might knock them down a peg or two in the ranking. But I wasn't too taken back by that. One team I actually thought was underrated might have been West Virginia, because I think West Virginia is going to have a really good year this year. So I think if you're looking outside that top 10 for a team that could make some moves into that top 10 and within that top 25, I think West Virginia is a team to watch in the Big 12.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I don't know if West Virginia is going to have a strong enough team for Will Grier to get Heisman consideration, but he's going to put up some monstrous numbers this year. Absolutely.
And again, I don't even think West Virginia is going to play for the Big 12 championship, but I think that they have a schedule where if they get off to a good start, they can rack up some wins. And if they do that, I think that they're going to gain a lot of confidence from the voters as the season goes on. And then it all may fall apart at the end of the season, but I think West Virginia's got the schedule. I think they've got the talent to put up some big numbers. The Big 12, you don't have to play too much defense, so I think West Virginia can get by with some question marks on defense for a while, but eventually it could end up costing them.
I think the interesting team that I saw in the top 25, well, specifically the top 10, actually, I thought Oklahoma at number 5 was interesting for me, just because I think that's putting a lot of weight on Kyler Murray to step in right away and be the kind of success I think Oklahoma fans are hoping. And it's interesting. I would have expected Oklahoma to be a top 15, top 10 team, but I thought number 5 was surprising. What do you expect from that team this year?
I get what you're saying, and I think when they lose a player like Baker Mayfield, who has done so much for that program the last couple of years, it's easy to suggest that they're going to take a significant step back maybe, or at least a bigger step back. But honestly, if you look at Oklahoma overall, again, a team to be in the Big 12, nobody's catching them just yet. And they're still going to be a really good team. They've got enough talent there to really continue their run, certainly within the Big 12. And I think, yes, replacing Baker Mayfield's going to be very difficult, but Kyler Murray is a guy that has the potential to continue a lot of the things that we saw from Oklahoma with their offense, opening things up a little bit. And again, if they have any concerns with defense, they can get by that in the Big 12. I just think that Oklahoma, even though they lose Baker Mayfield, and obviously they lose a couple other guys too, but they're a program that's going to continue to be on that kind of a level where you can legitimately feel like they've got a chance to make a playoff run, I think. So if you think 5's too high, that's fine. I'll go with it. But they're certainly top 10, and that puts them on the playoff radar for sure for me.
Yeah, it's kind of grasping at straws there. I'm really only arguing a few spots, so at the end of the day, it's probably nitpicking. But so the coaches poll was released on August 2nd. AP poll will be out August 21st. So one last question here before we wrap up, Kevin. So you mentioned the playoff rankings this year. The first playoff rankings will be out October 30th. The actual field will be decided on December 2nd. Just going back to last year, with some of the controversy, Alabama, just looking at schedule strength and what the committee members said leading up to the selection that week, and they were even with Ohio State, that sort of thing. I'm not asking you to critique whether or not Alabama belonged in the field over Ohio State, but given that inconsistency we've seen as to what really constitutes, conference champions getting the nod over non-conference champions, and we saw the same kind of situation come up with Penn State winning the Big Ten a few years ago. Would you change anything about the playoff format? Would you keep it at 4? Is there anything you would do to give more emphasis to conference championships consistently? What would you do to handle that?
Yeah, so I'll explain this as I've done numerous times for you and your audience. I'm okay with 4. If it's going to stay at 4, I'm fine with it. I don't see any real reason to change too much right now. But eventually this thing is going to expand, I believe. It's just a matter of when, not if. If it's at the end of this current contract, so be it. But I think when it does expand, it's going to go to 8 teams. And then I think when you do that, you're going to reward conference champions with an automatic bid. I think that's the only way that they would do that. because that way you get every power conference definitely represented. I still think it's weird that they agreed to a 4-team playoff where at least one power conference is going to be left out by default every season. Obviously, last year it was more than one. But I feel like it's going to go to an 18 field. And the way I've envisioned an 18 playoff is, again, have an automatic qualifier for your 5 power conference champions. You have one spot reserved for your highest group of 5 conference champions. So UCF would have been in last year. And then you got a couple at-large bids. You let the selection committee determine who's going to be those at-large teams. You seed them as the selection committee feels is necessary. Give the first game of that playoff to a home game to the top 4 seeds. And then you use the bowl structure as is for the rest of it. You can still have your playoff semifinals on the same rotation that they've been on. And then you have your national championship site wherever it is. That's the way I feel it's going to go. It's the way I've been supporting for a long time. I like the 18 playoff idea before we even got a 14 playoff. So I've been on that boat for a while. But again, if it stays at 4, I'm fine with it. I don't see any reason to change too much, but it would be nice to have some kind of consistency with the selection process. The only thing that I've come to a conclusion of over these last few years is that every season is different. So it's not like you can take what happens in one season and directly apply it to the next year, because the conditions are going to be different for your playoff contenders. So, and the committee's going to change too. So everybody's going to have a different outlook on who are the 4 best teams or the 4 most deserving teams. And how do you weigh best team versus most deserving team? Everybody's got a different opinion on that. So I still think we're sorting that out a little bit.
It's kind of funny because I feel exactly as you do. I'm fine with 4. I prefer 8. But it's funny because the 18 model that you just said, that's the exact, I mean, everything to the T, that is the exact system that I've been pushing for myself as well. That's the one I want to see. So it's kind of funny you said that, because that's it's like you were in my head there, because that's the format that I would like to see if I had my way. But like you, I'm fine with 4 teams though. So, well, Kevin, I appreciate you coming on, talking some college football. You can catch Kevin on Twitter at KevinOnCFB. And, of course, you can read his work on NBC's College Football Talk. So, Kevin, thanks for coming on and really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure, and it's always good to talk some actual football. So hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, we will definitely catch you again here later this season. Thanks, Kevin.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat, the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
Great stuff from Kevin McGuire. It is a breath of fresh air to be talking about college football. It is just around the corner, by the way, less than 3 weeks away till the September 1st home opener and season opener against Oregon State, which I know most of you Buckeye fans are hoping that'll mean the return of Urban Meyer to the sidelines and we can put all this past us, all the drama. Hard to say how this is going to turn out, but we are inching closer to college football. Quick basketball note, however. E.J. Liddell, a top 50 wing from Belleville, Illinois, is coming out today with his top 6. He was supposed to come out Sunday evening with a top 5, and then he later said he's actually going to be making a top 6. Ohio State, of course, scheduled to have EJ on campus coming up September 1st. He'll be in town. Ohio State is the presumed leader for EJ Liddell. A lot of momentum going right now for the Buckeyes. I can't promise Liddell is going to commit to Ohio State. Obviously, he's still got to take the visit. Missouri is involved. Illinois is involved. Kansas State's involved. I expect those 4 you're going to see on his top 6 today. And then whoever else will be in the mix as well. But I do think Ohio State is in great position for E.J. Liddell. He will be narrowing it down to his top 6. By the time you're listening to this, he may have already done so. That is scheduled to happen, I think he said, at 1 or 2 o'clock Central Time in the afternoon. So we'll see what happens there. But the Buckeyes closing in. Zeb Jackson, a 2020 guard from Maumee High School up in Northwest Ohio. He's one of the better guards in the 2020 class. In fact, he's a top 50 point guard. Ohio State definitely involved with him. It looks like he's got a loose final 3 of Ohio State, Purdue, and Butler. The Boilermakers, who got a visit from him last week, running really well there. He was scheduled originally to make an announcement today as well, but it looks like after talking to his family, that has been postponed indefinitely. So we may not hear a decision from Zeb Jackson for a while. Of course, that'll be interesting to see how that situation plays out, because Ohio State, liking Zeb Jackson a lot, but they also like Dominic Penn, son of Ohio State staff member Scooney Penn, and of course former Ohio State point guard as well. So Zeb Jackson was going to be announcing today, but that is not going to happen. It looks like he's postponed that indefinitely, but the Buckeyes are definitely in pretty good position to land him as well. Obviously, this 2019 class looking really good, especially if they get Lydell. Lydell would be with Gaffney and also point guard DJ Carton. 3 top 50 players. That would be a sensational class, a sensational haul for Chris Holtman's Buckeyes. Speaking of basketball and basketball Buckeyes, the great one, Clark Kellogg, will be coming up on the Friday podcast. Very much looking forward to that. So you won't want to miss him. We'll see what he has to say about the state of the Ohio State basketball program. I'll ask him what's going on nationally as well, his thoughts on the college basketball scandal, see if he has any thoughts on that. But we'll definitely talk about the Ohio State program. He watches practice a lot. Him being a trustee at The Ohio State University, he's definitely on campus and gets to see the Buckeyes practice and play a lot. So it'll be great to get his views. One of the great classy gentlemen there is. One of the great basketball Buckeyes to ever suit up for the Scarlet and Gray. That is going to do it today for the Unscripted Ohio podcast. Please catch me on Twitter at KYLAM8. Catch the show on BuckeyeGrove.com on Mondays and Fridays. And of course, you can catch us on the archives, SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Just search for Unscripted Ohio. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back at you Friday. Have a great week.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.